Good afternoon. This is October 31st. Yes, it is the Halloween. So let the kids have fun. In the next couple hours, they'll be coming around the house looking for candy and whatnot. Um, During this last week, we were taking another experiment doing podcast and also launch here in YouTube. In that particular process, we were able to also upload some of the graphic work I had prepared in the use of Canva. As I said, I am making this particular year in all the presentation here on live in YouTube, and then using the podcast format where there can be posting more of the canvas work. I do have a lot of graphics indicating the part of my personal history about my cross-cultural cycle, and the emphasis where my cross-cultural experience and the cross-cultural living and work, plus the 5 languages, and then in the 70s, 74, 75, when I have developed the 3C communications system during my master's, which I was awaiting to move that into a personal design doctoral program, which is quite innovative. So 45 years later, or since 5 years ago, during the time of COVID, the creation of the psychology of round and square has started. And in this time, another progress had evolving, coming into with the interaction with the 3Cs communications, along with the psychology round and square, which I have come to a certain kind of conclusion by me using more and more of the cultural sphere of different time zones. And it was very simple. Everything I'm trying to do is trying to make it as simple as possible. And after all these years of study, research, and analysis, and how much work, what the work I have done in the area of psychology, in counseling psychology, in the sphere, again, of the educational psychology, what can I bring to the public? What can I do? What have I accomplished to make things simpler, easier, and everybody can use? And that is the whole premise in the development of the 3C system, which is involving the communication dynamic. Dynamic is just our exchange. The second part of it, the communication analytica, which I have modified over these years and studying psychology from the time of Freud, psychoanalysis, and coming all the way into the Americas when the sets of circumstances in America, in North America, psychology had evolved away from the quote unquote Victorian era of the Sigmund Freud and psychology in Europe, namely Austria, Germany, in the Germanic language of psychology. So in this past 75, 85, 100 years, the psychology in North America had widening a lot more into different fields. Now you're talking about, I was determined to make my psychology into a cross-cultural psychology, which is also a little bit difficult in terms of the linguistics. In Portuguese, where I grew up with most of my observations as a teenager, if we can translate cross-cultural, they will go into multicultural or go into transcultural, but it's not the same. But nevertheless, I'm trying to make this in between languages cross-cultural for me is by my experience that I can function on one cultural sphere when I'm speaking only Cantonese with the Cantonese dialects or ethnic Chinese Cantonese, or speaking Mandarin with the people from Beijing, from the national language of Chinese, or when I switch into Portuguese and Spanish in different cultural sphere, I'm crossing over regardless what I know, what I can master, I'm crossing a cultural zone. No different than when we are playing tennis using rackets, when we are playing soccer, it's basically one ball, right? So the cross-cultural idea is that I am capable to move into different cultural zones and retaining what I have, but sharing what I can share with that particular arena. So that's the cross-cultural. And because I am feeling that I'm in a cross-cultural passage in my journey in my life from China, mainland China, into Cantonese speaking Macau, Hong Kong, where I have acquired English and then learning about Latin and Greek with Roman Catholics in the School of Salesians. I will keep on mentioning because a great part of my education in the multilingual dimensions, and also a very good system of education, regardless they're belonging to a Roman Catholic order or not. I think St. John Bosco and the Salesians had done fantastic work during the many refugee crises from around the world, or since the World War I in Turin, and then from Macau to Brazil. And Brazil is already a second home for me, a home away from home. As big as the continent of Brazil, as wide of the area of Brazil, where I grew up in the city of São Paulo. But the minute you walk outside of São Paulo, there may be a second or third world, not particularly, it's not an up or down level, but more so the intimacy, the people, and the language, and Brazil as a whole. If I can define what is the cultural sphere of Brazil, my first impression when I got to Brazil, when they used the term calor humano, means calor means calorie, heat, humanos, human. If the whole simple words by two words, the human warmth, that almost as the dimension of endearing, when they offer you a cup of coffee, has a lot more meaning than say, would you like a cup of coffee? It's almost extending. Aceita café. Aceita cafezinho. It's kind of endearment. So in all this exchange, I hope by my emphasizing the cross-cultural experience, these are the more minutiae, small segments of cultures that mean quite a bit more than that. And so from this dimension of the 3C communication, and this 3C communication, what I have created subconsciously when I defined the sphere, I was at a college campus, working with students, working with them along the way with the personal situations by the communication of the communication dynamics, and teach them the overall how to using the idea. What is round, we got along. What is square, I'm questioning. And when the square turns, that is, you become more hostile or you become more aggressive. So I'm using basically two shapes, round and square. And when the square turning, it's a triangle. And remember also in this form and shape, there's a dimensionality. A square turned sideways is I'm attacking you, I'm calling you names, I'm insulting, we're arguing. But the other angle is pointing at yourself and basically make you think, I'm hurting you, I'm hurting myself. Okay? It is to raise a certain kind of dimensionality when we share. Either way, the two rounds, we are being very reasonable, very affectionate. A bigger round, the smaller round is the parent to a child, or the coach speaking to a youngster in such a way is assertion, is affirmative, also with command, with order, but all in the context of the adult, responsible adult working with a youngster. And these are the dynamics that I will be able, I hope by late this year, I will be produce them in format, in different formats, in almost in lecture form, in durations of 15, 20 minutes, and in multiple languages. There's such a multiple language can be adapted using technology like Synthesia, or are you even talking about in the future what is with China with the AI and all other up and coming technologies technology will enable us to put that into a very physical, very short clips on 10, 15, 20, 30 minutes, okay? Because what the psychology of round and square is becoming a new ambience, a new era. Be very grateful of all the past education that I have learned from psychology. Nothing is perfect. Life is going on, but you have to give credit where credit is due. Be that Sigmund Freud created psychology, had granted him his status as an ethnic Jewish medical doctor, opened up the door into the school in Vienna, and follow up by Gustavo Jung, who's Swiss, who did not follow the same ideas of Sigmund Freud, who ventured on, if I'm allowed to talk about the Sigmund Freud's ego, I, super ego, the cultural ego, and then ID, which is the instinctive, natural instinct, very much about the sexual dynamic that Freud talking about fixations. And even with that particular group of the thinkers, philosophers, psychologists, and so on and so forth, Gustavo Jung took off from another angle and looked into the global cultures and other areas of historical things, aesthetics, and in search of his idea of what is the total psyche. Back to the US, and all this many teachers, I took them as an educators, Rollo Maid, Alfred Adler, even Eric Fromm. And only time ever in this last 75 years now, I'm talking that my personal experience, the only time anything about from Asia ever shared or spoken was Eric Fromm's and his book, Psychoanalysis and Zen Buddhism, involving the Suzuki from Japan. And then coming further, we talk about one of my most admired psychologists is Carl Rogers with his unconditional positive regards. Basically, he's already talking about discarding the script of the Freudian terminology, the sort of individual character, the symptoms, the somatic types. Roger basically talking about that you and me, you are in a situation, I want to work with you. I disregard whatever conditions before you. You are who you are. I am who I am. I do my best. And the theory about congruence is how authentic you are. Many times we live in a world that have so many expectations on us. And this kind of expectations, external or internal, and it becomes, you create anxiety. And anxiety is what most psychologists we're dealing. I want to make it very simple with this structure. And this is where and when I working at college at that time in 74, 75 in the University of Wisconsin at the Platteville campus. And this is evolving with me learning very simply about the transactional analysis by Eric Burns from Carmel, California. So the development of the using three sets, just call them cultural spheres. Instead of a Freudian superego, ego, and ID, id, it becomes the parent, the adult, and the child. And in this transaction, what I have expanded their dimensionality, the size, I modify from round to square, and from square, half the square is a triangle. So by every time, if I am speaking to my students, if we're allowed to use any measure and tape, what you've written down before that, you can look back how they express themselves. And in those expressions, you can mark it circle, mark it square, just make it simple. Round, we're communicating. Square, I'm a little puzzling. You and I will agree, for the most part, even I'm presenting here. And the level we're talking about politics, all of a sudden, wait a minute, is he a Trumpian right, or is he a left to the Democrats? I mean, we all form and shape opinions. And regardless if these opinions are valid or not, we are constantly evaluating, just like here on the screen. Is Paul talking nonsense? Is that Paul talking imaginary ideas? Regardless, there's got to be appeal. So in what I have made clear to me and to my students, and I found effective, where I have basically gravitating less and less about the personal issues in the using of the communication dynamics. Cases in point, I have a student who eventually went to get his PhD, but during his college year, minor issue that he was never really intimate until when we met. He was basically a junior. He was never intimate or find any closeness with women. Why? Okay, this sounds very Freudian, very wow, psychologist. Well, when he was teenager, his father caught him masturbating. Everybody said, "Whoa!" Maybe the comment in a punitive measure, in a way to castigating the son and say, "You will never go, you will never go anywhere. You may become a homosexual." But regardless the ignorance of the parties, this young man carried that stigma with him in college. And our exchange within the context of the in my use of the communication dynamics, we just brushed over. I said, "How do you feel about why are you raised this point?" He said, I have developed some interest of a fellow young student, a lady. And then the story came on with the event, what happened to his family. Now, if I were a therapist, I may be working on a lot more extensively. Instead, I just brush it over of the issue. I have him, so have you ever touched any man? Are you afraid to touch any man? He said, "No, I have never." I have him touch my hands, grab my hands, and firmly, and looking at me firmly, and say, "Here you go." He was very nervous, shaking, trembling. But once a few practice I have worked with him, he was over. He started dating, he got married. What I'm trying to say, if there is a blockage, if there is impediment because a event took place when he was a youngster in high school, and the value system from his family, how they evaluate, now he come to college, he has an option. I never want to become a therapist because it's much more when I can work with him psychologically, and also I can work with him academically. He's doing well, he's progressive, everything. The whole point is when I'm doing counseling with both the personal issues, and I make sure what I can do with his personal issues, obstacles, or whatever we call it, the past wrongful, basically misinformed informations. Now we modify. That's over and move on. There is a futuristic, a future focus about this environment that I was in. So the cultural sphere is education. We're in academia. Of course, there are many, many situations that I find out for my students. Part of it can be therapeutic just by clarifying the point, making that point he had about himself is already overcome. That's it. Don't continue. Don't overburden. Let that go and move on. He's become a man that no longer has question about his masculinity. He grabbed my hands, shake my hands without fear. Is that a touch of a homosexual? Basically, the two obstacles he overcome, move on. That is a part of the communication dynamic I created with the Communication Analytica. Basically, I'm teaching my students. He is the round and the square and the triangle. And we can put all this configuration into very complex color to translucent to transparent. So there are many ways to express in the intensity and using color to also give emphasis. That was before today. We're talking about each one of us receiving over 60,000 daily when we awaken. 60,000 stimuli, just stimuli. If we take 10% of the 60,000 or 1%, we talk about 600 stimuli. Are things that being fed, being touched, feel, listen, music, whatever. There's a quantitative way eventually to measure the stimuli, positive and negative, or harmful or hurtful or whatsoever. But I just take this that we are a intelligent human being and we have many perception of things. And when we perceive it wrong or putting in the wrong context, we may have misguided ourselves to some way. So that's why I also like the term about counseling and guidance. And in the development of the 3C communications, now is the psychology round and square. And it is becoming a new way to expand psychology. And in Spanish and Portuguese, it's much simpler to understand. It's called psicologia popular in Portuguese. In Spanish, psicología popular. But eventually you can explain the psychology round and square, but the popular psychology is ultimate aim that I have had in me always. How can these many poor people, starting as a youngster looking into Brazil with the shantytown, the favelas in Rio de Janeiro, now they expand into other urban area. It's the shantytown. It's the migration from poor area into a city without any kind of urban planning that we know today. So psychology, if the round and square, can be put into all area, all spectrum, and all age. So counseling psychology can be done very popular. And from this, we can populate the general public in the learning of psychology and square. And who would know, in the next round in the future, there'll be a generation of people involving psychology, involving counseling, and they can decide to move their own professional path to whatsoever direction. They want to become a psychiatrist, they're welcome. They want to become a psychologist, a clinical psychologist, or educational psychologist, or just a counseling psychologist, like I have shaped my career. So time to reinventing the study of psychology and make this psychology round and square very popular. This is one dimension how I have created the psychology round and square. And the other emphasis, which coming from this last 45 years, for those who had listened to me before, from 1977, even today, my wife and I, Kathy, we still own the business involving gemstones and minerals, involving Brazil, mining, and the global distribution, which I have basically resigned. 5 years ago, when the COVID came, I said, this is something about the psychology running square today, and the three C's, and I can create something that I can be fostering and cultivating, and something that maybe I can pass on to a larger audience. And that's mine. That's entirely mine. That's for my collective life experience in culture, in languages, and in also conducting myself as a teacher educator. So from this dimension, the psychology around the square can be a potentially much wider for the counseling community and the community people who are engaged in psychology. And psychology, basically using that word, psychika, is the psyche, and the image is one time of the Greek nymph in the Greek mythology, with all the deities and the interesting, funny, carnal relationship between in the Mount Olympics, from Zeus to the various deity and their personal and sexual relationship. Nymph, the picture of the psychology, is a young maiden looking down at a pond, very still water, almost like a mirror. And then her image is look into the water and think. So from thinking, it comes to reflecting, thinking back, or introspection. Here, because my cross-cultural background and my Chinese, which I have continued to retain as much as I could, and this is the Western idea, the psyche, and which I will come gradually into this particular segment, explaining where the Chinese would talk about is the language of the heart. And let us make some kind of a clarification here. Even in linguistically, we're talking about the three elements. We have cognition, we recognize, we know. We have emotions, which talk about our sentiments, our feelings about issues. And then from cognition, emotion, we come into an area we can call affection. So in the West, I'm playing the psyche and then the three elements of the entities. But on the Chinese side of it, the language of the heart. By the way, in what I'm doing, I'm not into a position to be very authoritarian. What I'm suggesting, even with this exchange, we're encouraging a new development from the people from around the globe, and to look at psychology in the use of the psyche in the Western concept on the mindset, and in the East. And I'm just making the very audacious recommendation and suggestions that many cultures that also may share the idea that speaking the language of the hearts. In later form, for those who can access the dictionary, look at the word heart. It's basically, it's a pictographic forming the chamber of the hearts in Chinese. And next level that I'm still digging, there are about 40,000 Chinese characters. Most people communicate using 2,000 plus or around that area. There are many words. I'm using the shape of the heart Chinese, using in the Western composition of a word, prefix, suffix, and then radical. And the heart, you can want to see the composition in the words. In many, many words, and for the audience, Chinese, who can handle a good use of AI, can actually, like the way I use in ChatGPT, Claude daily, and also Gemini, to find out how many Chinese characters are written with the word heart. And here is the interesting development, and why I'm talking about psychology round and square. Very subconsciously, the round in the Chinese old language, even today, round is the sky. Square, you can see the horizons, is the earth. So from that departure in psychology and the work psyche, in my use of the psycholinguistic observation from languages interface with the study of psychology, the psychology round and square have already been in me even in 1974 without me putting the emphasis of the cross-cultural psychology in the use of this, call it metaphor, or the configurations of the round and square. And from this particular timing point, when I put the title, typed in the pedagogy of conscience, and it's because my recognition of the use of the heart and making a little bit of with a little aggression, that we Chinese do speak with our hearts. And there'll be more example, maybe more comments, and in the future development of my videos and my presentation in the psychology round and square. And from this departure, from the 3 C's into the psychology round and square, now what is emerging in the same 3 different spheres, this element of the pedagogy, of the method, mechanism to emphasize what is conscience. First and foremost, conscience cannot be taught. Conscience is the outcome of the human thinking. Conscience is the inner value system. Before I even don't want to use the word morality, because this will not do justice about human conscience. The simplest way to grasp conscience is Walt Disney's movie cartoon, of Pinocchio, Italian novel with the character Jimmy Crickets is the one of the ambassador, of conscience. Conscience have, if in Google use a quotation conscience, you will find hundreds, if not thousands, from the ancient times of the Greeks to the present time, with the emphasis and speaking of conscience. However, conscience is the best illustration I have done so far. Is like the procurement of the Chinese for the finest herb that can cure many type of herb that can cure disease, from ginseng to different kind of quinine, or the early both East and Western medicines were using basically the common grass, the common greenery we see every day. However, like all the greenery, like all the grass, the herbs that have a curing power oftentimes are hidden in the entire mass of the green things, the green plants and green grass. In different kind of mountain and crevices, a certain kind of herb can be discovered, which have a curative power. And this is the way what conscience is amongst us. And yet I cannot sit down and say, let me teach about conscience. But you can illustrate the many events. And conscience does not have to be in conflict with religion. Conscience by me is something in us. It's the little treasure, the little gemstone we can find out. But conscience can be coexist and relating to all the religions in and around the world. I'm purposely speaking about religion to bring out into another dimensionality, speaking of the cultural spheres, because this is a major cultural disconnectness or dissonance, which is existing right now. The world is in conflict. The world already convoluted by our system of government, fairly warned by President Dwight Eisenhower of the American military-industrial complex, meaning when there's profit, the production, the Americans' rapid recovery from the bombing of Pearl Harbor during Second World War, which rallied the entire nation, which at one time was under depression. And the fast comeback and the fast production had turned America into one of the most powerful nations. And from that point onward, the industrial production has taken a different distortion. Eisenhower was very, I think, timid or not. He took his last day before he resigned as the president and warning the country, be careful with the military industrial complex. I'm not afraid to make this statement. It's because when you're making war into profit, and that is a huge human perversion. Maybe speaking of conscience, that's a good point to point it out. Because when you do create war, when you're playing numbers, you know how many bombs you can use, how many people you can kill, how many nations you can be destroying. And then you're already looking this as all data. In today's talk about AI and data, there are people already looking into post-Ukraine, how much money they can earn by rebuilding Ukraine and parceling out land, building, assignments. I mean, for me, conscience, the first thing about conscience is about our inner self values before the external influence. And mostly, for the longest time in the Western tradition, we have been influenced by religions. Let me just put it this way. There's a total misconception from the West to the East. Again, let me repeat, China. This is going to become a very crucial subject matter and topic. I'm not alone. There might be other speakers, other people who have the same awareness as I have, and trying to define what is this cultural dissonance. And by the way, I have written in paragraphs in some context about the Chinese Holocaust with opium, the Chinese diaspora. By the last 200 years, the suffering the Chinese had from the internal burdening by war, by a weak country, by the weak of the Qing dynasty, and also in their perception how to use opium by the first male, in Portuguese we call it primogênito, the firstborn, because in that particular system at that time of the China period, from Qing to the early Republic, the affluent, the affluent Chinese, be that of the Qing rulers and their group and the Han Chinese working with, they always give the priority to the firstborn. And he's basically the key figure to inherit the family wealth and hope, have enough wisdom to how to do the dispersion or to administer the company wealth. What happened, opium just happened to the right time, the right moment, the right product, because just a little bit of social structure in that particular cluster of Chinese culture, because the firstborn handling basically the entire family fortune and wealth. If he's not disciplined, like any affluence, he can be corrupted by the gambling joints. They can frequent with the very sophisticated Chinese form of brothel, which some of you may know more about the segments, talk about the geisha from Japan, but China in a much more sophisticated in the structure, where these are the story I'm telling with some personal experience about my uncle and my grandfather from the mother side also was a Manchurian magistrate, meaning regional ruler, and smoked opium. And opium was induced into China not just because the British burned out their silver by over drinking tea. And funny enough, tea was introduced to the British society by the Catalina de Braganza, who happened to be the queen of one of the British kings at that time. Table manners, drinking tea, and eventually that minor habit turned into England wasting all the silver, and they wanted to recuperate the silver from China, where the opium was introduced, planted in Bangladesh, colonial England, sent to China. So in this social setting, where the firstborn have so much power that depending on a single man, and by not knowing, aware the effect, the ill effect of opium in the beginning of time to use opium. Opium seems ideal for the Chinese because it makes the man mellow, not particularly animated or aggressive. Well, in that way, he will not be frequenting the brothels and the gambling houses. In the days when I talk about my uncles were frequenting using the brothels, there are many types of geisha. In Chinese written is the prostitute, a professional woman with artistry. So many women they can do all the Chinese art forms, play the instrument, play chess, good reading, make poems, and painting. So all the artisan skill, all the poetic, all the classical training, these are the geisha. Gei is art. Sha is a professional woman. Even to call it prostitutes a little bit derogative in these terms. They will sell that talent. So men go into this brothel, luxury homesteads, listen, play chess, entertain their friends, and inviting a geisha lady to be with them, amongst them. And this sets of geisha never sell their body, only the skills and talents. Of course, there was the others. And of course, the transitioning with this kind of the professional geisha sometimes can fall in hard times by seduction, by whatever reason, end up joining. But many of this geisha, if they join a particular one of the men, frequenting this kind of an entity, have to pay a very high price. And many had happened to become the wife or second wife or concubine of a very of the upper society. So the impact of that particular time and point, opium came in the right time because it reduces the aggression of man, make them docile, seem to be very peaceful. But with time, opium turned it into a total vice, and opium had humiliated China more than 100 years. From 1840 on until the Chinese communist rise of Mao Zedong and forming the People's Republic of China in 1948. That is also the year I was born. But to a large extent, any kind of a vice like opium came in the right time, at the right moment, with the economic purpose behind it is for the British to retrieve silver, because none of the other products from the British, from Europeans, were interested by the Chinese. And yet the Chinese, in that particular time in point of the time, with all the Chinese product from tea to silk to porcelain, had a 40% of the global control. And before China got totally humiliated, in that time and period, both China and India commanding 60% of the world wealth. So what China is coming back, you may call it an economic renaissance, and also in part is a cultural renaissance. But in and between, there was a very painful, come close to 200 years of the humiliation of the Chinese in the global scene. I mentioned this because the next subject matter I'm going to come up is about how the East, or China, and the West have become totally disconnected. First of all, just make it simple. The West had started their global conquest. Let's start with the Spanish Inquisition, 1492. In Spain, after Spain, we take Granada in the Andalusia, in the southern region, and also the same year, Columbus discovered the Americas. And the background a little bit complicated, but it's uniquely, I'm still researching, is the funding of his voyages by the many ethnic Jewry who do not want to convert, and yet they're looking for opportunities to move together with the Spanish fleet. And many investment had gone into with Columbus. And Columbus, just a little bit of a, I got it for foca in Portuguese, a little gossip. Columbus was never, ever Italian. Just by a simple measure, Columbus first got into the island called Hispaniola, where today the islands being shared by Dominican Republic on the east end, and to the west is the Haiti. And this is where he has structured his family's headquarters. And when Columbus got into the island he named Cuba, and from this name Cuba, with all many more researchers dating back to 1972, and I'm reading on them, Macareñas, Barreto is another Chinese, another Portuguese writer. Columbus himself is born in the city called Cuba, in the region called Alentejo in Portugal. His father was the Count or the Duke from Beja, B-E-J-A, Beja, and his mother was a converted Jewish family. Last name is Zarco, Z-A-R-C-O. His grandfather from the Zarco family was one of the explorer who had discovered the island of Madeira. Because how Columbus named Cuba, in the islands in the vicinities, all after names of saints. And if you look back into the map, you can Google the map in Cuba, in the peripherals or around the region of the Cuba, in Alentejo, or the other small towns carry the same name. after many patron saints. Just a little bit of the gossip column of Columbus. And this expansion after the Iberian explorer, predominantly all the 4 ocean explorers established Asia by Vasco da Gama, Pedro Alves Cabral into Brazil in 1500. Again, Columbus, 1492. I think 1497, Vasco da Gama had gone into Asia. It is because the school of the navigation of the Prince Henry in the southern tips of Portugal had done very diligently with coasting along the west coast of Africa. And then eventually, by 1460s, they already had discovered a settlement in Lagos, means lake in Nigeria, Ghana, and all the way coasting along the west part of Africa. Only Vasco da Gama turned the corner, had gone into Asia. And 20 years later, the third explorer is Fernand Magalhães. I want his name totally in Portuguese. Most American, most English-speaking world knew him as Magellan, who had gone on to the same way by way of into the Americas, following Columbus, following Pedro Alves Cabral. And then he also go along the coast with the ambitions funded by the Spaniards to find the pathway from the southern part of South America, had gone into the Pacifics and named it the Ocean Pacifica. And from that point, he eventually ended up visiting the island today we know as Guam, used to be known Isla de los Ladrones, the island of the thieves, and settled eventually in Cebu in Philippines. The Philippines was named Las Filipinas, was named after Prince Felipe, who became Philip II, eventually the Emperor of Spain, known for his battle with the Armadas, fighting the British. And he aligned with the Queen Mary of Scotland, the Catholics, trying to fight the monarchs in England. I make this emphasis in a very general way. First, to highlight the navigation skills of the Portuguese. Number 2, and the massive empire the Spanish had. And not to forget, we all know about the Silk Road, but there is a second Silk Road, we can label as that, is the importance of the empire established by the Spaniards in the islands, Las Filipinas, today we know the Philippines. And then many, many similarities. To look at the cathedral built in the city of Manila is almost a direct copy of the cathedral in Mexico City. And this region of the Spanish Empire, if you Google the Manila galleons, and you will find a broader spectrum. And just in very quick, just talk about ethnic Chinese. In this development, Manila become the capital of the Asian zone of the Spaniards, where they have the city. But outside the city, called Barrion, basically they're the heathen, they're non-Roman Catholics, non-Spaniards, where over time, from the time they discovered Manila, Philippines, the population of the Chinese settlement outside of the city of Manila, the cathedral region in the Barrion, almost 50 to 60% was ethnic Chinese. And in that part of the exchange, and this particular cluster of the Philippine Islands, with Manila is the dominant city, had continued on for 250 years of the Spanish Empire, covering all the Pacific. And not to forget, not until the Mexico became independent, and not become Teddy Roosevelt had battled in Cuba, defeated the Spanish, the entire Spanish Empire from Spain crossing over to Mesoamerica, Middle America, and with the expansion, their territory covering present-day California, New Mexico, Arizona, Texas, this much bigger territory region. And why continue such expendable expansion of the Spanish Empire? There's another minor secret, is because Spanish, I'm borrowing the Portuguese naming of the territorial and maybe shared by the Spanish, called the Capitania. That is part of the Spanish territory going to Mesoamerica, into Guatemala, into Peru. And from the region of Peru, they already discovered the silver located in Potosi, Bolivia today. And the silver of Potosi from Bolivia transporting up to the Mexico, moving forward, onward into Manila, where the silver, 70% of the production had gone into Manila through the hand of the Chinese merchant coming in from Fujian, coming in from the area. They speak the Minnan, just like they speak much of that in Taiwan today. Even language is a little modified, mixed with other dialects. But Fujian province is where all the silver hitting the end era of the Ming Dynasty, and that would demand, and the currency become in silver. That's what most of the silver coming from Bolivia, Potosi, under the rules of the Spaniards, from the region, the territory only known to all is Peru, and onward with the trade from Manila through the ethnic Chinese outside the region called the Barrion, and then onward with China. And 30% had gone back into Mexico, going through Veracruz and the island of Havana. Those are the many ports. And then eventually went on to Spain. And the Potosi silver, with more research, they have sustained a large part of the Spanish Empire. And just look at 250 years, the Spanish Empire is in America, Mesoamerica, North America, in the island of the Philippines, and the control of the ocean of the Pacifics. The Portuguese and the Spanish also have the trade with slavery in the Philippines, in Manila. But however, I think the secrecy of these roots is because it's silver trade. And only later on, here comes the pirate of the Caribbeans. We talk about Francis Drake of UK or England got knighted for becoming a good pirate. Henry Morgan, same way. And then that's how it started. Eventually, the rise of the England sea power and capturing all the treasury, or the ships, or the galleons of Spanish ships already bearing, carrying wealth, silver, gold, emerald, and whatsoever. From the part of Brazil, the Brazilians were also very lucky by finding Ouro Preto up the coast. And the region I know very well, and those gold from Portugal had gone into Lisbon, above and beyond, moving into the Netherlands, to the Holland, to the Dutch, to become globally commercialized. But this is another story. But just to know the territory and the size of the growth of the European power, shifting from the Iberian power of Portuguese and Spain, and eventually with British development of the first Industrial Revolution and the steam engine and the gunpowder, that gave the British the colonial power of the entire Asia. India was totally taken in 1700s. And by the 1840, by the Opium Wars, and the British had controlled the entire east coast of China, of all the port cities, with their base ceded by the Chinese for Hong Kong, with the land, with the borrow or 199-year lease of the peninsula of Kowloon. In this mention of the Western power, European power, the enslavement of the African slave to plant tobacco, to plant cotton, mostly the sugarcane, the expansion of the West. And along the way, in part of the Spanish, Portuguese, Iberian conquest, they are also deployed along with the missionaries. And now we talk about 1500. And just think what have caused such a zealotry of the Roman Catholic missionaries, because less than 200 years before that time and period, Europe suffered one of the greatest disasters with the Black Death. 30% of the European population got wiped out. And because the Black Death had changing the city-state dynamics, where once the workers for the owner of land has started their migration into the city, into the urban area. I think this are the part of the economic dynamics often we don't see, but to understand that this Western expansion. Now here comes what I want to talk very importantly is about the West and the Western mindset about ignorance. Please don't take me as being offensive. The European, with their technological advancement, with the Spanish ships, the Spanish, the Portuguese get their ship caravelas from the Arabs in North Africa, from the coastal, from the compass from China, and many other advantage, skillful, useful technologies, and eventually the Spanish galleons, and then the English steamships. But what I'm trying to say, in this particular cultural dissonance, what I'm talking about, is that the Western mindset, including the rulers and their rules and the papacy, and look at how linguistically that even with abuse of the church, that's later on, the papacy and the influence of the entire Europe with the missionaries heading out to all corners of the world, in part is because the reaction from the Black Death, their sense of a future, the sense of the immediate, their termination of lives, heading into heaven. They want to convert, or they think they were doing something which is benevolent. Again, let me repeat. I came from a Roman Catholic education, influence, and with much exchange. And I'm also was baptized by one and only the Jesuits from Italy in Macau, his first mission, Matteo Ricci. And Matteo Ricci was one of the few Westerners when he set foot onto China. And he had made some very, very important observation, and by risking his own status, when he said, these people with their orderly way need not to be evangelized. And because of this statement, he had caused the attacks coming from the Dominican order. The Dominicans are the most fervent Roman Catholic. This one order that had commanded the Spanish Inquisition with the famous man known as Tomás de Torquemada, and also the Franciscans. So what I'm trying to highlight this point before I get to this, the cultural sphere of the entire Western mindset, and this mindset including the religious who had influenced the colonization, namely the Iberian, Portuguese, and Spanish. They all come down the four religious groups. Let me use it again. Judaism. Then come the Roman Catholicism. And then we have the Protestantism. And even including the Islam, we call it Islamism. And all four of them can be put into the sphere, which I call the Abrahamic cultural groups. And because what they shape their cultural groups from power to intellect to education to technology, none of them had ever perceived China and the Chinese three main branches of the teaching of Confucius, the teaching of Lao Tzu, which is Tao, or Tao. We write today about DAO, and also Buddha coming in from India. The Buddhistic values is about human compassion to all living things. The Taoist is basically talk about the early ecological balance, man and nature. We do not violate nature. And Confucius is all about the human goodness and kindness by the cultivation of the human heart. Conscience, written in Chinese, can be called 良心 or kind heart. But if I turn it to Portuguese, I say coração de bondade. It's already immediately coming the heart of the good heart. Kindness cannot be expressed without the presence of goodness. And in this aggregate of the three basic thoughts and ideas, much more created a confluential and together concurrent value system by the 14th century and 1500s, the Chinese scholar named Wang Yangming, who had created his study, making the assembly called Xin Shi. Xin is the heart, Shi is learning. I have made the audacity, willing to put this into a not gamble, but putting into in a more affirmative action way, that I translate this to consciencology and consciencologia, because I have adapted first my awareness of the Wang Yangming 1500 by way of the Brazilian psychologist, educator, Paulo Freire, who had written, I call it the one word Zen, bring Zen into the Buddhist, the cultural sphere, is when I translate conscience from English to Chinese, the kind heart, 良心, has surfaced. It's not a matter of being right or wrong, but what I trying to show my audience, this tremendous amount of the ignorance about the Chinese. Let me repeat again. It's not wrong about being ignorant. Ignorance is not a crime nor a sin. We're very clear in my Roman Catholic upbringing about what is mortal sin, what is not, what's a venial sin. Because the venial sin is unintentional. You did not know you had done it wrong. The West, with all this preoccupation of conquest, about land grabbing, about enslaving, about forced trade to sell China of tea, to try to recuperate from the over and abusive drinking of tea, exhausting their treasury. In 1492 until today, yes, until today, the way the Americans and the Europeans trying to shape their dialogue trying to shape their narratives in wanting to find villains in this world to start war, risking even the nuclear arsenals by the Russians. I think in all my life growing up, traveling from different cultural zones because the Civil War, my father had warned us, all the children, not ever to step into politics. However, the political situation today, which I'm trying to find my participation in the emphasis of culture. This is the one segment what I call cultural dissonance when I talk about the ignorance, is because the West had never grasped the Chinese culture and the Chinese civilizations. For now, we just talk about 33 years. We have evidence, written culture since the Shang Dynasty, 3300. But with the other artifacts found with evidence in the existence of Chinese villages, populations come to 5, 7, 10,000 years ago. We found pottery, bits and pieces. We found jade. But we cannot find written language as we have discovered the oracle bones in 3300 in the period of Shang. So what I'm trying to tell the world today is that the Chinese language, yes, we're speaking from our hearts. If you talk about the language of the heart, which in most Latin languages today, in cultural groups and psychologists and scholars, has started using affecto, the affection. When I say about affection, is coming up from the two part of emotion and cognition. So we're coming close. But because not knowing the Chinese in all our life and through all these years, and by every word of Confucius, and because of Tao, Lao Tzu's teaching of Tao, the way, and Buddha in his compassion, and because of the projection of the Abrahamic culture and their calling of Judaism, Catholicism, Protestantism, and Islamism. They label also Confucianism, Taoism, Buddhism. What I'm bringing out is to now we can filter. Again, it's a common mistake because we got all our 4 branches starting with religion, tribal religion. Then we're projecting all the other religions behind them, ism, such as Zoroastrianism and others. What I want to make this particular point with total clarity is partly because my life cycle, my cross-cultural passages had allowed me to walk through some of these passages. And only Paulo Freire have me awakened of my association linking the Chinese language is the language of the hearts. Let me repeat. Because the educational system, because the technological system about information, and also about in this last 40 plus years. Let me take 1991. It's the year of the internet, the year of the Microsoft programming, and also of the computer. We come into the IT system, information technologists, after Web 2.0 and after the several phases with incoming technologies, now we are coming into the digital age with AI and with the speediest algorithm, quantum accounting, tabulation. So I can share my daily questions of my findings by way of all this Gemini, ChatGPT, and extensively to my own personal preference in working with Claude. And I have my very strong intention in less than 4.5 weeks, I have managed to have produced 90,000 words, come close to 300 pages of the book, which is called Pedagogy of Conscience. Meaning, I don't have all the answers, but by opening this book to be written and be published into the Amazon, and soon that book can be going to 160 language plus. This will be creating the form of interaction to allow us all to think and to reflect, be critical, be supportive, add value to the book. And this is allow me have created another system of a universal learning program. I call it Open Books.ai under my name for now. www. Paul Yih spells as PAULYIH.ai/open books in both English and Chinese. But what the open book can do and will do is no longer allow you and I or anybody be stopped by something that we do not know. If you are a Chinese reading this book, the entire English context, even by wanting to know what that word mean or what the sentence mean, the open book will grant you the total freedom. Of course, the system can be signed up by everybody with the I agree. Trust me, you will not be extensive. It's very simplistic. You are not coming in to create trouble or havoc because everybody has to gain. You can insert into that particular line with your name, your email. You have maybe a number, maybe a code. Then other people can respond to that particular moment of your puzzling, of your hesitation, or your doubt. Be a word, be the sentence, and be the entire paragraph. And this will create a kind of interaction. And you can push the button, the page can be, all the books will be published on the open books for the same open format. You can read the book in the entire context, and you can highlight every point there's a question raised, and who was the questioner, and who had responded. Not me alone, but by the entire audience. This is where we have to come into, if we want to build a future, a world that is coherent. We have been overly impeded by our personal biases. The history I have learned today from my past history of China can be much better reviewed, and I can actually take the entire 3 existing system of ChatGPT, Claude, and Gemini. And I trust there will be other similar entities from other cultures. Yes, it takes 1 minute for you to Google Translate from the entire text in English to Chinese to whatsoever language. More than that, This is still in the formation. After this presentation, I'm using that as in the YouTube model. You can, when you put CC in the language to be shared, that will produce already a narrative from the second you start into the end. And if those documents can be downloaded to open books and allow me or you to do the first edition. The first edition is basically in the capture of the sound by the YouTube. Many sounds, many words have similar sounds, but it's not the particular word you want to use. So you do the first edition. The first form will be there. The additional form will be second, and you will bear your name, your signature. And from that point onward, the following document, again, can repeat into all languages. And those languages in the open book document can be already allowing the interchange and the insertion of your questions. And education can start it with any of this presentation, with groups of scholars, academicians, teachers, to rephrase, re-narrate into the category of the school system. This story can be presented now to a sixth grader with the sixth grade teacher participation and modified into a language where the school system deems proper for the grade. And I think we are coming to this kind of technology, into this era. And we're already into many things. It's the future dimension called the spatial web. The spatial web already here. Because by the way I'm using the three systems here in the US, talk about Gemini, talking about ChatGPT, and talk about Claude. By me looking into my history like a tubular, and I'm only have an angle from this tube of my view of the Chinese Civil War. And by communicating with this three system, they give me already a peripheral, a roundabout vision of the event. Why open books? The open books will service as the blockchain, the screener, to allow all the more comments can be further validated, not by one, but by the entire global audience. And this is why I think what is coming into the future for us to grasp, to understand better our conflict is because our blocked information, deliberate or not. TikTok and the social media today, where I watch most of my media, never in my life thought that I will be engaged with 4 to 5 news stations from Taiwan. Why? Because many of the stations are not in agreement with the government. And to bypass the jurisdictions of the Taiwanese government of the news media bias, they put them on YouTube. CTI is one of them. Why am I watching Taiwan news? It's just to get one extra perspective, because Taiwan is in a very unique situation. They watch the development with the war in Ukraine on a daily basis and questioning what will be the fate of Taiwan in the mindset of the current Taiwan government, who has the tendency, influenced by their part Japanese heritage, and not wanting or admitting that Taiwan is one province of China. And because of this discrepancies, all the station, their analysis, their background of this analysts from former ambassadors in different countries, from the graduates from Harvard, Yale, with the same person also getting his other degree from Tsinghua, from Beijing. The cluster of intelligence and the depth of their resources had given me a much more broad-based analysis about the status of Taiwan, not alone, but also the many contingency, many of the Chinese actions and motions from mainland. Because they are in a very dire situation with the Chinese Navy exercising their blockades. What is not to intimidate, but it is a fair threat or warning. Do not push your luck. Why Taiwan government in itself is trying to play the part, expecting the support from the up and coming regimes after November 5th. But this dynamics, something that the Taiwan news media that provide us for those who understanding Chinese, which I've encouraged them to continue to broadcast with subtitles in all languages. This is the greatest time when you find these stations, this many talent with the objectivity, and to give me the current situation between Taiwan and China. And likewise, I never thought I would be listening to another group in Cantonese called What Gay in Hong Kong, another independent group that reporting their daily news on all global events, but with a much more in-depth from the perception and the intelligence of this news media group. I can even call them journalists because they came far more prepared and much more articulated than a common reporter. So these are the global dynamics. And the way I perceive open books is not to topple somebody like Facebook, which Facebook have a 1.5 billion English-only audience. But the open books can opening up to the entire 8 billion, the world population, in the respective language, interpreting, analyzing what is on communication today. And this is why I think by opening this particular cultural dissonance, how the West see Chinese with the use of the language of the ism, categorizing all the three dominant Chinese disciplines into religion. But in actuality, the entire Chinese focus were never about religion, but really about to cultivate, to induce kind knowledge, which is conscience. And I hope this personal discovery will find greater echoes. More than that, if I can find another 1 million people of any background to be able to shine lights on what I have just discovered, this is never about an ego trip. This is about where learning, knowing, knowledge, screened by conscience, will become wisdom. Some intelligence can be very negative, can be very self-serving, or serving to just a particular national interest. That's why wars. But I think to know, the way I put in other graphics, we searched knowledge, and then we mainly found intelligence that would serve only to those few for that particular intelligence. Case in point, Chinese had created gunpowder. For what is the purpose? Fireworks. But by way of the West, be that by way of the Mongols, they turn into cannons and powder, gunpowder, guns, cannons, nuclear power. Chinese invented paper. And Chinese never had the time of the legal convenience, the legalistic society like the UK and the Anglo-American situation, where you can register, copyright, patent. And I make some joke one time, some 25 years ago, 30 years ago, when I was asking to speak at Tempe, Arizona, the Arizona State University, some particular individual graduate students, MBAs from Spain, asked me to come in to speak a program. The assignment was the untraditional business. It was involving totally about the gemstones and minerals that I had started in 1977. And I traveled back and forth to Hong Kong, China, Brazil. And this particular time in point, the professor's named Friedman. Come on, very friendly. He said, you know, Paul, you're from Shanghai. I was also born in Shanghai. So I go back to him and said that, so you can speak Shanghai. No hoa. Well, he said, I had forgotten most of my Shanghai. And then the situation is not meant to be hostile, but eventually turned out to be a little bit or so. There was 120 graduate students in the class. And we're just talking about, the topic amongst them was talking about copyrights and patent and legal registry. And somehow the subject matter turned into me and said, Paul, what do you know about the Chinese coming up with thousands, if not millions, of the CDs, that are selling very low prices versus the regular CD was like Madonna was $16, $18 per CD. I said, I'm aware of the CD's production because where I have my gemstone cutting sites and the lapidary work, and there were other factories, and they do come up showing pictures of them selling CDs, music, or movies for $1 US, all around there, or less. As a matter of fact, the cost of production at that time was 25 cents. And then he was pressing onto me about this infringement of the music of Madonna. That's, I remember very vividly. And first I responded very casually. I said, I'm not sure the economic scale between the US, Europe, the first world, and this condition in China. And if I were Madonna, I would look at that as a free distribution to let my voice heard in that region of China. Well, they also mentioned that has been sold to Vietnam, Southeast Asia. But I said, what's wrong with that? Well, so what's wrong is that you have infringed on the earning of the singer. So knocked off. It's infringement. It's a copy. It was just at that particular time and point. Our group in business, moving forward, we have always been advancing to our technology and skills. We just installed Microsoft softwares, Words and spreadsheets, my first part of data. What happened here, and I look at the class, about 100 of them, and I know my first round, the first sets of the software were costing about 480, somewhere around there. So I asked the students, listen, well, would anyone let me know how many of you are using Microsoft Word or Microsoft spreadsheets? Almost 40% of the class raised their hands. I said, thank you very much. And then I want to ask the next question, Dr. Friedman, if you allow me. How many of you have paid for the full price what we have paid? Only 5 or 6 hands raised. And so I told him, Dr. Friedman, here is the economic scale of things. The software is costing close to $500. And in your class, you saw how many hands raised, how many have paid for it. But maybe, I don't know, maybe the other one have the free use by the school system or by the library or whatever. I said, this is all about the economic scale. And we were still a little bit contesting. Finally, I poked a bit of a fun to everybody else. I said, Dr. Friedman, you talk about this lecture and this portion of it, talk about patent, copyrights, legal registry, and infringement of the copyright patent. I would like to give you a proposal. You, among your students and your legal partner teams, if we allow to retroactive the invention of paper alone, can you imagine if we are going to ask all the Western nations around the world in the use of paper, in each and every time, if you wipe your butt or blow your nose, pay us 1 penny for 10 years. And by the way, Dr. Friedman, I'll be happy to give you 20% of the earning. The entire class starting to laugh and applauding. I said, depending at when and what time the legality at the legal system imposed, created by the West. Again, if we can retroactive the creation side of the paper and pay us 1 penny, how much money would China have gained? Again, this is all hypothetical, just poking fun, making fun of it. But this is the whole argument about who's right, who's wrong, who have first invented, who's created. And I hope at the end result of this particular presentation, which had first time in my life extended over to an hour and a half, is all about the perception from the West about the East. And in this particular segment, I just hope the West will learn more about the conscience-based culture of the Chinese. And that can be much more to gain in the future. Instead of war, there can be more genuine peace. And by creating, instead of 800 billion US defense costs, which is 10 times over the education budget in the US, can be spent for alleviation of the poor, anti-poverty, medical benefits, building medical infrastructures, instead of preparing a total imaginary future conflict and wars. The Chinese military budget is 3 times of the education, but the US budget is 10 times, 9.9 plus, which is 800 billion a year. Again, this is just a perspective in seeking a potential global harmony by knowing the Chinese language is spoken from our hearts, and the entire system is all about human conscience. Thank you. Gustavo, pronto.